The coffee in the break room used to be an espresso. We had the little metallic pods color-coded by intensity, stacked in neat glass towers that caught the morning light filtering in from the ferocious Chicago skyline. It was a small thing, a luxury that our founder, Mr. Henderson, insisted on. He used to say that if you're going to ask people to move millions of dollars before noon, the least you can do is caffeinate them with dignity. Now, it was brown sludge in a generic glass carafe that smelled like burnt hazelnuts and despair. I stood there watching the dark liquid drip slowly into my mug, realizing that the coffee was the perfect metaphor for what Apex Logistics had become in the last 6 months. Since Mr. Henderson retired to his vineyard and the board brought in Julian, everything had shifted from substance to optics. Julian insisted on being called just Julian. He was 34, wore sneakers that cost more than my first car, and used words like disrupt, pivot, and lean agile as if they were punctuation marks. I'm Martin Wallace. I am 55 years old, and I've been here for 25 years. I started as a junior analyst when we were just a regional logistics firm, and I climbed inch by bloody inch to become the director of capital projects. I don't have an MBA from Wharton. I don't have a social media following. What I have is a memory like a steel trap and the personal cell phone numbers of every major commercial lender in the tri-state area. I built the financial bedrock of this company. I negotiated the revolving credit facilities that kept the lights on during the crash. I structured the debt for the fleet expansion. I am part of the drywall, but drywall isn't sexy. Drywall doesn't get venture capital excited. Martin, earth to Martin. I turned to see Nolan leaning against the doorframe, flashing a grin that was all teeth and ambition. Nolan Pierce was my VP. Technically, he was my boss, though I had spent the last 5 years teaching him how to read a balance sheet without hyper-ventilating. When Julian took over, Nolan had latched onto him like a barnacle on a hull. He traded in his tailored suits for slim-fit blazers and started drinking green juice during meetings. "Morning, Nolan," I said, taking a sip of the terrible coffee. It tasted like battery acid. "What's the crisis?" "No crisis, just vibes," he said, finger-gunning me. I physically suppressed the urge to throw my mug at him. "Julian wants the Q3 projection deck scrubbed again. He thinks the risk assessment is too pessimistic. Wants to show more blue sky potential for the board." "It's not pessimistic, Nolan. It's math," I said, keeping my voice level. "We're leveraged heavily. If interest rates tick up even a quarter point, that blue sky turns into a thunderstorm. We can't just delete liabilities to make the slide look pretty." Nolan sighed. A dramatic exhalation that suggested dealing with reality was a burden he shouldn't have to bear. "See, that's the legacy thinking Julian is talking about. We're not a logistics company anymore, Martin. We're a tech-enabled logistics platform. The multiples are different. Just massage it, please, for the team." "I don't massage numbers, Nolan. I audit them." He stopped smiling. For a second, the mask slipped and I saw the annoyance underneath. "Just get it done by the all-hands meeting this afternoon. Julian wants everyone aligned." He pushed off the doorframe and walked away, tapping furiously on his phone. I watched him go, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just the request to fudge the numbers. I was used to sales guys trying to inflate projections. It was the silence that was bothering me. For the last 3 weeks, the email traffic in my inbox had dropped by 40%. Meetings that used to require my signature were happening in breakout sessions that I wasn't invited to. The Strategic Planning Committee had been renamed the Growth Squad, and my calendar invite had mysteriously disappeared, replaced by a generic notification. I walked back to my office, one of the few actual offices left after Julian tore down the cubicles to create an open-concept collaboration zone that sounded like a cafeteria during a prison riot. I sat down and looked at my dual monitors. I pulled up the server logs. It was a habit of mine, a paranoia bred from years of handling sensitive escrow accounts. There it was, a folder created at 7 a.m. this morning on the shared drive. Confidential Restructure Draft V4. I tried to open it. Access denied. "You do not have permission to view this resource." I stared at the screen. I was the director of capital projects. There wasn't a single financial document in this company I shouldn't have access to. If they were restructuring and I was locked out, it meant one of two things. Either they were doing something illegal, or they were getting ready to fire me, or both. I sat back, the leather of my chair creaking. I looked at the photo on my desk. Me and Mr. Henderson shaking hands after a major deal. He looked so proud, I looked so young. Legacy thinking, Nolan had said. I opened my drawer and pulled out a small red notebook. It was my backup brain. In it, I had written down the details of every covenant, every clause, and every handshake deal I had made over the last 2 decades. I flipped to the back to a section titled 2021. Debt Consolidation, First National Bank. My eyes scanned the lines I knew by heart, but I needed to see them written down to calm my racing heart. Clause 17B, Key Person Provision. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They thought I was just an obstacle. They thought I was just a middle-aged man with a spreadsheet habit who didn't understand the vision. They thought they could just delete me like a bad line of code. The all-hands meeting was in 4 hours. Julian was going to stand up there and talk about the future. Nolan was going to nod and clap like a trained seal, and they were going to look at me sitting in the back and think I was finished. I took another sip of the battery acid coffee. It still tasted terrible, but now it tasted a little bit like fuel. I opened my laptop and started typing an email. Not to Nolan, not to Julian, but to Simon Hughes, the president of First National Bank. Subject: catching up. I didn't send it yet. I saved it to drafts. I needed to see how they played this. I needed to see the whites of their eyes. The office outside my glass wall buzzed with the frenetic energy of young people who didn't know that companies could die. They were talking about stock options and launch parties. They didn't hear the structural groaning of the hull, but I did. I had built the ship after all, and if they wanted to throw the captain overboard, they were going to find out the hard way that I was the only one who knew how to steer. The town hall auditorium was freezing. It was another one of Julian's changes, keeping the ambient temperature at a brisk 68 degrees because he'd read a blog post somewhere that said colder temperatures increased cognitive synaptic firing. To me, it just felt like a morgue. I sat in the third row aisle seat. It was my spot. It had been my spot for 10 years of quarterly reviews. Around me, the new breed of employees were settling in, balancing their laptops on their knees, their faces illuminated by the blue light of Slack channels. There was a nervous energy in the air, the kind of electric static that precedes a thunderstorm or a mass layoff. The lights dimmed, and the bass-heavy intro music started thumping. Julian bounded onto the stage. He wasn't wearing a tie. He was wearing a t-shirt under a blazer that cost a fortune. He grabbed the microphone with 2 hands, leaning into it like a stand-up comic about to roast the front row. "How are we feeling?" he shouted, generating a smattering of applause. It wasn't the thunderous ovation Mr. Henderson used to get, the kind that came from genuine respect. This was the applause of people who were afraid of losing their vesting schedule. "We are at an inflection point," Julian began, pacing the stage. "For decades, this company has been a giant, a slow, lumbering, sleeping giant. We moved boxes, we signed papers, we did things the safe way." He made air quotes around the word safe like it was a slur. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I knew where this was going. "But the world doesn't reward safe anymore," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The world rewards the bold, the agile. We need to shed the weight of the past. We need to trim the fat." On the giant screen behind him, a slide appeared. It showed a rocket ship taking off, shedding its booster stages. The boosters were labeled legacy systems, redundant processes, and traditional management. Nolan was sitting in the front row, nodding so vigorously I thought he might give himself whiplash. He caught Julian's eye and gave a thumbs up. "I know change is hard," Julian said, walking to the edge of the stage. He stopped directly in front of me. He didn't look at the crowd anymore. He looked right at me. "Some of you have been here a long time. You've built comfortable little fiefdoms. You think you own your processes. You think the company can't survive without your rubber stamp." The room went quiet. The air grew heavy. Everyone knew who he was talking to. I was the Department of No. I was the one who blocked the purchase of the luxury company Jet because it violated our debt covenants. "But let me be clear," Julian said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Nobody is bigger than the vision. If you can't get on the rocket ship, you get left on the launch pad. Some of you need to remember your place. You are support staff. You are the plumbing. We are the architects." Nolan let out a loud, sharp chuckle. It echoed in the silence. "Know your place," Julian repeated, softer this time, but with more venom. I felt the blood rush to my ears, a hot, stinging wave. It wasn't the threat of firing that hurt. I had a solid safety net. I'd be fine. It was the dismissal, the plumbing. He was talking about the financial architecture that kept his paycheck from bouncing, as if it were a clogged toilet he was too important to plunge. My face didn't move. I didn't frown. I didn't scowl. I practiced the stillness I had learned in 100 boardroom negotiations. I simply reached out, firmly grasped the lid of my laptop and closed it. Snap. The sound was small, but in the quiet room it sounded like a gunshot. Julian blinked, momentarily thrown off by the lack of submission. He turned back to the crowd, launching into a diatribe about vertical integration synergies. In my pocket, my phone buzzed, one long vibration, then another. I slipped it out, shielding the screen with my hand. It was a text message, not an email, a text. Sender: Simon Hughes, First National. Personal message: Martin, are you in the room with him? My risk officer just flagged a drawdown request for $40 million on the revolver. Signature looks creative. Call me now. My heart stopped, then restarted with a slow, heavy thud. $40 million, the entire liquidity buffer, and creative signature. That meant they had tried to bypass me, had tried to forge an approval or use an old authorization code. This wasn't just breaking internal policy. This fell under forgery, specifically Penal Code Section 470, assuming they falsified my digital signature, which would make any contract void ab initio. Void from the very beginning. I looked up at the stage. Julian was gesturing wildly at a graph that went up and to the right, totally divorced from reality. He looked like a god. He felt like a winner. He had just publicly humiliated the only person in the room who could save him from federal prison or financial ruin. Know your place, I whispered to myself. I stood up. Julian stopped mid-sentence. Going somewhere, Martin? We're just getting to the good part. Bathroom, I said clearly. My voice didn't shake. Unless I need a permission slip for that, too. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. Julian's jaw tightened. Don't take too long. You might miss the future. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. I walked up the aisle, my shoes clicking rhythmically on the concrete floor. I didn't look back. I pushed through the heavy double doors into the hallway, the thumping bass of the presentation fading behind me. I looked at the phone again. Call me now. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of industrial cleaner and ozone. The anger was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I swiped right and pressed the call button. Good morning, Simon, I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic thumping of the bass that still bled through the auditorium doors. Martin. Simon's voice was clipped, tight. I could hear the background noise of a busy bank office on his end. Simon wasn't a branch manager. He was the president of commercial lending for the entire Midwest region. We didn't talk about the weather. I have a drawdown request here, initiated by a Julian Vance. It's asking to max out the credit facility for a quote-unquote strategic acquisition in the APAC region. I'm not aware of any acquisition in APAC, Simon, and I certainly didn't authorize a $40 million wire. I know you didn't, Simon said, because the authorization code used was from an old protocol. It's technically valid in the system, but it hasn't been used since Mr. Henderson left. It triggered a level 3 compliance flag on our end. He's trying to bypass the countersignature, I said, the realization settling on me like a heavy coat. He thinks because he's CEO, he has unilateral access to the debt facilities. Does he? Simon asked. The question was a test. He knew the answer. He just wanted to know if I was still the person he thought I was. No, I said firmly. Reference the 2021 Restructure Agreement, Section 4, Paragraph 2, and the side letter regarding the key person provision. I heard the typing of keys on his end. Pulling it up now. Yes, here it is. Drawdowns exceeding $5 million require the dual authorization of the CEO and the Director of Capital Projects, specifically Martin Wallace. And here's the kicker. Failure to maintain Martin Wallace in a key oversight role constitutes a technical default. A technical default, I repeated, tasting the words. For those who don't speak banker, a technical default is the financial equivalent of a nuclear launch. It doesn't mean you ran out of money. It means you broke the rules of the loan. And when you break the rules, the bank doesn't just get mad. They get everything. They can freeze accounts, demand immediate repayment of the entire principal, In our case, $150 million, and essentially seize the company's assets. They tried to remove you from the signatory list this morning, Simon said, his voice dropping an octave. We got a fax from your legal department, a request to update the authorized officer list. Your name was crossed out, replaced with Nolan Pierce. We rejected it pending your confirmation. I closed my eyes. They had really tried to do it while I was sitting in that meeting, listening to Julian insult me. They had tried to erase me from the company's financial DNA. Under the Warren Act 29 U.S.C. Section 2101, mass layoffs without notice are illegal. But doing this kind of financial maneuvering could tank the company and force immediate liquidation, triggering Warren Act violations as a side effect. More importantly, this was a breach of fiduciary duty. Julian was risking the entire company's solvency for a pet project. Simon, I said, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window, I need you to do me a favor. Do not process that wire. Obviously, Simon snorted. I'm not sending $40 million to a guy who wears t-shirts to board meetings unless you tell me it's okay. And the signatory change, it's in the trash. As far as First National is concerned, we're the gatekeeper. That was the deal we made with Henderson. We bet on the jockey, not the horse. You're the jockey, Martin. Thank you, Simon. Martin, he paused. If he pushes this, if he tries to override the bank, he will, I said. He thinks banking is an app on his phone. He doesn't understand that relationships are legally binding. Then he's going to hit a wall. A very hard, very expensive wall. What do you want me to do? I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked tired. I looked 55. I looked like plumbing. But plumbing is what holds the water, and without water you die. Hold the line, I said. He's going to call you. He's going to scream. He might threaten to move the business to Chase or Wells Fargo. Let him try, Simon laughed. With your leverage ratio, nobody touches this debt stack without your personal guarantee on the oversight. You're the only reason the covenants are waived. Exactly. So when he calls, don't answer. Let him sweat. Let him think the system is broken. I need him to realize that his rocket ship doesn't have any fuel unless I sign the check. Understood. I'll put a temporary hold on the revolver. Compliance review. It sounds scarier. Perfect. And Simon? Thanks. I hung up the phone. The silence in the hallway felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was pregnant with potential. Inside the auditorium, I could hear the muffled sound of applause. Julian must have just unveiled the new logo or something equally useless. I turned away from the meeting. I walked toward the elevators. I wasn't going back to the auditorium. I was going to my office. I had work to do. If Julian wanted to play games with the company's lifeblood, I was going to show him what happens when you cut an artery. The office floor was deserted. Everyone was still in the town hall drinking the Kool-Aid. I sat down at my desk and woke up my computer. I logged into the back end of our ERP system. Most people think the CEO has the master key to a company. They imagine a golden password that unlocks every door. In reality, modern corporate governance is a web of permissions, roles, and segregation of duties. Julian had the title, but I had the admin rights to the finance module because I had set up 10 years ago, when we migrated from legacy servers. Furthermore, Julian's actions could easily be classified as a dissipation of assets, squandering company funds while the company was in a fragile leverage state. I navigated to user management roles. There was Julian's profile and there was Nolan's. I didn't delete them. That would be sabotage. And I wasn't going to give them grounds to sue me for destruction of data under 18 U.S.C. 1030. I simply enforced the rules. I clicked on Global Settings, Compliance Protocols. I checked a box labeled Enforce Strict Segregation of Duties, SOX 4004. Then I went to the Treasury Management module. I found the pending transaction queue. There it was, the phantom request for $40 million sitting in a pending bank acknowledgement state. I opened the audit trail for the request. It showed the user J. Vance had initiated it and N. Pierce had approved it. 1 minute later, dual approval. Technically correct except for one thing. I opened the approval hierarchies table. I found the rule for capital expenditures over $5 million. I added a new condition. Requires approval group director cap. Then I went back to the specific bank interface account settings. I changed the security protocol from standard to enhanced verification. This meant that any outgoing wire over $10,000 would now require a physical hardware token, a little RSA dongle that generated a 6-digit code every 60 seconds. I had the only active dongle in my top drawer. Julian had lost his week 1. Nolan never picked his up from a tee. I sat back and watched the screen. The system refreshed. The little green light next to the bank link flickered and turned amber. Status: verification required. Somewhere in the cloud, the digital handshake between Apex and First National was suddenly demanding a secret password that only I knew. I wasn't done. I opened my email and drafted a message to the general counsel, Sarah. Sarah was a good lawyer, but she was terrified of Julian. She bent with the wind. I needed to stiffen her spine. 2. Sarah Jenkins, General Counsel CC, External Audit Partners, Board Risk Committee subject. Urgent compliance alert, unauthorized debt restructure attempt. Sarah: I have detected an attempt to draw down the entirety of our revolving credit facility, $40 million, this morning, without the requisite covenant certification or the signature of the designated guarantor, myself, as required by our 2021 Master Credit Agreement. Per our fiduciary duties, I have placed a temporary compliance hold on all Treasury functions to prevent a technical default. Please advise the board that any alteration to the signatory list without bank consent triggers immediate repayment clauses, and attempting to forge electronic approval constitutes forgery under state law, rendering the request void ab initio. Regards, Martin. I hovered the mouse over the send button. Copying the external audit partners was the nuclear option. Once the auditors knew, it couldn't be buried. It had to be investigated. It became a material event. I looked at the clock. 11:45 a.m. The town hall would be ending in 15 minutes. They would be walking out high on adrenaline, ready to spend that $40 million. I clicked send. The whoosh sound of the email leaving my outbox felt like the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. Almost immediately, my instant messenger popped up. It was Bob from IT. Bob: hey Martin. Getting weird alerts from the Treasury server, says token mismatch for the CEO's account. Did you change something? I typed back. Just running a routine security patch, Bob. Tell him to restart his system if he complains. It usually takes 24 hours to propagate. Bob: will do. Thanks. I leaned back in my chair. The trap was set. The water was cut off. Now all I had to do was wait for the house to catch fire. 30 minutes later, the executive floor was buzzing again. The growth squad was gathering in the main boardroom. I wasn't invited, of course, but the boardroom had glass walls. I sat in the breakout area just outside, ostensibly reviewing a stack of invoices, but my ears were tuned to the frequency of disaster. I could see them. Julian was pacing, still high on his own supply from the speech. Nolan was setting up his laptop, projecting a slide deck titled Project Velocity, APAC Expansion. The board's finance subcommittee was there. 3 serious-looking men in gray suits who had flown in for the occasion. They were the money men. They didn't care about disruption. They cared about ROI. Gentlemen, I heard Julian say, his voice muffled but audible. What you saw downstairs was the vision. What Nolan is about to show you is the fuel. We are ready to pull the trigger on the acquisition of Thai Logistics in Singapore. The LOI is signed. The funding is secured. One of the board members, Mr. Caldwell, leaned forward. Secured? That's a $40 million cash outlay. Julian, our last liquidity report showed $6 million on hand. That's legacy accounting, Julian scoffed, waving a hand. We've leveraged the revolver. The capital is sitting in our operating account as we speak. We moved it this morning to demonstrate speed of execution. I turned a page of my invoice stack without reading it. Here we go. Nolan clicked the next slide. It showed a screenshot of a bank balance. $46 million. As you can see, Nolan said, pointing a laser pointer at the screen, we are liquid and ready to strike. Refresh the page, Mr. Caldwell said. He was old school. He didn't trust screenshots. Nolan smiled that oily, confident smile. Of course. He tabbed over to the live banking browser window projected on the screen. He hit F5. The little spinning wheel appeared. It spun and spun and spun. Then the screen flashed red. Error 4003. Authorization failure. Token required. Balance unavailable. Nolan frowned. Wi-Fi must be spotty. 1 second. He tried it again. Error 4003. Compliance lock engaged. Contact Administrator M. Wallace. The room went deadly silent. The name M. Wallace was projected in bold red letters 10 feet high behind Nolan's head. Julian stopped pacing. He stared at the screen. Nolan, what is that? I don't know, man. It's asking for Martin's token. Bypass it, Julian snapped. Use the admin override. I am using it. It's not working. Nolan's voice pitched up, cracking slightly. Mr. Caldwell put his glasses on. Why does it say compliance lock? Julian, did you clear this drawdown with the compliance officer? I am the CEO. Julian slammed his hand on the table. I am compliance. That's not how banking covenants work, Mr. Caldwell said coldly. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the bank. I saw Julian's face drain of color. He lunged for his own phone. He dialed furiously. I knew exactly who he was calling. My desk phone rang. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. In the boardroom, Julian was staring at his phone, then looking out through the glass walls. He spotted me. I was sitting calmly, a highlighter in my hand marking a line on an invoice. I didn't look up. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. Then Julian's cell phone rang. He answered it, looking relieved. Simon, finally. Listen, your system is glitching. We're in a board meeting and… He stopped. He listened. I watched his posture collapse. It was subtle, but I saw it. The shoulders slumped, the chin dropped. Simon was giving him the speech, the technical default speech. Julian looked at the board members. He looked at Nolan. Then slowly he turned his head and looked through the glass wall directly at me. I looked up. I locked eyes with him. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stared blankly like a piece of plumbing that had suddenly decided to stop flowing. Mr. Caldwell stood up in the boardroom. Julian, if we don't have the liquidity, this presentation is fraud. We need to adjourn now. No, wait. It's a clerical error, Julian pleaded, following them as they started packing their briefcases. Martin just needs to click a button. It's just a button. Then go get him to click it, Mr. Caldwell said, buttoning his jacket. Or we have a very different conversation. Julian stormed out of the boardroom. He was coming for me. Before Julian could reach my desk, my email chimed with a priority notification. It was a personal address I recognized instantly. Henderson@gmail.com. The subject line was just a winking emoji. I opened it quickly. Martin, Simon, at First National said there was some excitement with the accounts today. He told me you handled it. Good man. I'm starting a new venture next month. Boutique investment firm for sustainable infrastructure. Small team, good coffee, no growth squads. I need a CFO. Salary is double what you're making, and you get equity. Let them burn, Martin. Then come home. A lump formed in my throat. For 6 months I had felt obsolete, dinosaur legacy. But the man who built this place knew exactly what I was worth. I wasn't just plumbing, I was the foundation. Martin. Julian was standing at my desk. He was breathless. His hair was slightly mussed. The disruptor facade was cracking, revealing